Let's come to this and the HS2 project, beset by delays down the years, hasn't it, and soaring costs. Now, the government's own infrastructure watchdog believes it to be unachievable. Having looked at the construction of the first two phases of the line, from London to Birmingham and then on to Crewe, the Infrastructure and Projects Authority has said the project was not, in its view, deliverable in its current form. News that this organisation, which sits at the heart of government and reports to the Treasury, has branded it as unresolvable, will be seized on by many campaigners, wildlife groups and, of course, people living in the area. But already huge swathes of the countryside have been laid bare during the construction. So what is the future now? Well, let's turn to Joe Rukin, who's founder of the Stop HS2 campaign group. So much work has already been done, and indeed money spent. What do you think the decision should be now? Good morning.
Well, Nick, the thing is, it's not news that they've said that HS2 is undeliverable, because it's been undeliverable right from the start. You'll have seen the debacle at Euston Station, for example. It is 13 years since they came up with HS2, and they still have not got a deliverable station at Euston, because the station that they want to build, the overground station that they want to build, cannot physically fit in the space available. And I'm mentioning this because this is symptomatic of the entire HS2 project, that it has been put forward on wishful thinking and lobbying from the construction industry. And that's why they don't really care every time it goes up in price, because the people who are behind it are the people who are making the money out of it. And it is no way to set government policy. They basically came up with this idea: we want to build the most expensive railway in the history of the world, give us a load of money. And that's what gullible politicians decided to do. And now we have an absolute mess. As you said, there are so many natural habitats that have been destroyed by HS2. Drinking water in the Chiltern Chalk Basin is under threat. We've seen sinkholes in the Chilterns. We've seen slurry pools coming through the Chiltern Chalk aquifer, where HS2 said, no, there'll be no problem whatsoever. And experts were telling them from day one that there were, the Chiltern Chalk aquifer is a geologically unique global structure. It's basically chalk lattice, effectively rubble that's been compacted down. And they treated it as if it was solid chalk, like in Kent. And as a result, you're getting all of these problems. But the thing is, when you get problems, it means more money for the construction industry. And that is how this has been driven from day one. And people say, oh, well, you spent all this money on it already, you've got to go ahead. Well, that's like saying, well, I've burnt a tenner, I might as well burn everything else that's in my wallet as well. And it is absolutely insane that politicians cannot see or refuse to see that they have been conned by the construction industry, and communities, habitats, wildlife are suffering. And of course, so much money is going on HS2. There's no money. Look at what else is happening in the rail industry. We're seeing ticket office closing. We're seeing staff on strike because they can't afford to be paid. No electrification. Electrification is ground to a halt, which is obviously that if you want to build rail for environmental reasons, you would electrify the entire network, and that's ground to a halt, because you had politicians for decades saying, oh, it's not either or. Of course it's either or.
But we've sunk, as you'll be aware, billions of pounds. Are you suggesting then that just literally written off?
Well, the thing is, they haven't built any rails. All they've done is clear the land, put down a few bridges, and started on some tunnels. That is literally all they have done. Oh, and knock down buildings. That is literally all they have done. There's no railway infrastructure in place, or anywhere near being in place yet. The track bed, the concrete slab that this thing is going to run on, that isn't even down yet. All they have really done is created loads of environmental damage and build a couple of structures like bridges, some tunnels, and not buildings down.
Supporters point to the fact of capacity, of course, Mr. Rukin. They say that this is what it's all about. It shouldn't have been called HS2. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's not. See, you had Gareth Dennis on earlier, who is basically, he works for one of the construction firms. He works for Arcadis, and he touts himself as an independent expert. But he works for one of the construction firms. And of course they're going to say whatever they can, because the reason they argue capacity is what they're trying to say is, oh, well, you don't understand railways, and I do understand railways. So if I say it's about freeing up capacity, then you're going to believe me. And no, it's not about freeing up capacity at all, because the amount of capacity that HS2 frees up is absolutely minimal. And when you talk about freeing up capacity, well, what does that mean? That means cutting the trains on the existing services. And the example that I always go to is Coventry. For example, every train between London and Birmingham stops at Coventry. You take London to Birmingham off the West Coast Main Line, you stick it on HS2, you can't justify, those trains are only going from London to Birmingham. You can't justify all the West Coast mainline trains that are stopping at Coventry. So Coventry loses those services. And the same is true with the city centre in Nottingham, in Leicester, Derby, Wakefield. There's loads of places up and down the country that will lose their current intercity services if you free up capacity. But the whole idea of freeing up capacity, you've got to think, hang on, well, wait a sec, HS2 isn't going to make a profit, it's going to need subsidising. Mm-hmm. So how are you going to free up capacity if you've got all this increased revenue needed to be pumped into the rail system just to subsidise a train for the rich?
Lastly, hardly a month seems to pass without another report calling into question the validity of HS2. The budget now is heading towards 100 billion. It started life at just over 40 billion. What do you think will happen?
Oh, the problem is I have absolutely no faith in the political system whatsoever. I think what we'll end up with is this half-finished thing, because I'm not convinced that they will never get the station that they want into Euston unless they build up or build down, and they simply won't accept that. We're going to end up with something is either far less functional than what was proposed, because bear in mind, it was meant to connect to the Channel Tunnel, it was meant to connect to Heathrow Airport. Now the link to Yorkshire, to Sheffield, to Leeds, and even to probably Nottingham was okay, but that's up for grabs, or possibly getting cut back. And of course, the idea that it can get to Manchester through the checkered brine fields, which is highly unstable, is very questionable. So what we're going to probably end up with is something that is a tiny fraction of HS2, but a massive, massive over-budget project. Billions is going to be blown on this thing.
I will end it there, Joe. Thank you, Joe Rukin, you're founder of the Stop HS2 campaign group. I've been suggesting that this money could be spent far better fashion, this railway, for a couple of years now. When did they first start? About 13 years ago. Yeah, 13 years ago they started this, with an initial budget of £42.6 billion and £100 billion, just a fraction under £100 billion now. And even if you were a supporter, surely now, with the way the workplace has changed and the fact that so many people now can work from home via Zoom or Teams or whatever, the pandemic changed, and it's not the fault of people who supported HS2, by the way, because when it was first started, it probably did make a degree of sense. And certainly, if they had got it, I mean, dear God, if they'd managed to get it from the Kent coast all the way up to past the Midlands, powering up to Yorkshire, possibly knocking on the door of Scotland, that would have been quite something. The fact you could get up there in just a matter of it's never going to happen. The environmental damage, as the contributor was just explaining there in the Chilterns, which is an area I used to go there quite a bit. I don't go there anymore. Absolutely beautiful part of the world. I would have think probably devastated. Politically, of course, devastating with the Conservatives. Remember how they lost the by-election there, and I would imagine they're probably currently on target to lose quite a few more. So how do we claw out of this the best way? Because a lot of money has been sunk, as have tunnels and bridges and foundations. Very few people want the damn thing. It's unachievable, says a government. It's government's own financial watchdog body, effectively. How do we get out of this alive? How do we make it look like the utter cluster shambles it is? We'll take your views. Or are you going to tell me that we build on? I don't think many of you will, really.